All right, well, welcome everybody. I think
All
we're
right.
just about ready to get started. Elaine, take it away.
Yes. Thank you guys for joining us today on our first webinar of 2023, even though 2023 is about to end. But we're really excited to have this conversation about the unified patient record. Just a little bit about the AIH as well as some housekeeping before I turn it over to our moderator today. So we are going to have at the last 10 minutes of this webinar a Q&A section. So please submit your questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom. So not the chat function, but the Q&A, and we'll go through them and try to get to as many of them as we possibly can. So today's webinar is specifically focused on the unified patient record and why there currently isn't one. And our expert panelists have actually written a white paper about this particular conversation to set the stage for several additional conversations around this really important yet very complex topic. And so our panelists are going to share some of their insights, their research findings and recommendations, and a little bit about the AAIH first, and then I'll turn it over to Kazi. So the AAIH, or the Alliance of Artificial Intelligence in Healthcare, is a collaborative coalition driving artificial intelligent innovation in healthcare and in life sciences. Our mission really is to unite organizations addressing shared challenges and advancing AI adoption for the benefit of our industry and ultimately the patient well-being. Our members are incredibly diverse. We range from everything from drug development to software as a medical device. We have small companies and quite large companies, but we all struggle with the same challenge of addressing things like large data sets and regulatory issues. And by joining together, we can help address many of these issues. We really want to thank our members seen here. And with that, I am going to hand this over here to Kazi. Kazi Mustak Hussein Kazi, who is our chair of the AAIH, and will be leading as the moderator for this panelist.
Thank you, Elaine, and welcome. I'm really excited today to kick off our first webinar on this topic. And today we are talking about the unified patient records. It's a simple idea, but it can make a huge difference in healthcare. Just imagine going to any doctor in the US or in the world, and they know your medical history. Imagine how much mistakes will be reduced by that. We'll get better care, smoother experience for everyone. And that's what we are aiming for. So let's get started and how we can make this happen. So with that, I'll have Shalini and Andy and Rita introduce themselves. So Shalini, can you maybe talk about also not just introduction, but like you have talked to a few patients and what is their perspective on this issue?
Certainly, Kazi. So I will introduce myself first and then perhaps Andrew and Rita as well. And then I can address your question gladly of what did I learn from speaking with the patients. And I spoke with two patients. So my name is Shalini Trefser, and I am the data and AI specialist as well as a principal for life sciences at Microsoft. What this means is that everything that Microsoft offers in terms of incoming data all the way through that chain of preparing that data for insights, drawing insights, reporting on those insights, and benefiting from running AI on top of those insights. This entire set of services and frameworks are what I work with. And I typically work with customers across the life science industry, as well as across the healthcare value chain. So this has been a fantastic journey for me, also in the AAIH as co-chair of the data working group. I'm working closely with Kazi, with Rita, with Andrew, with all of the members of the data working group. And it's been a tremendous privilege. So this white paper on the unified patient record, this was suggested as a very key topic of current times by one of our members, Michael Kremliowski. And then together, all of us have developed it into what it is today by first asking questions, because Kazi had spoken to us in the early days of this white paper, and we realized that until we ask the right questions, we are not in a position to start proposing solutions to this very complex issue. So which is why the white paper is in the form of questions. So let me hand it over first to my colleagues, Andrew and Rita, and then I'll come back to Kazi's question of what insights did we gain from speaking with patients. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shaleen. And first, I'd like to say thank you for the amazing opportunity to be part of this working team. That is fantastic. I'm Rita Gaspardi. I'm the Global Product Manager for Data Store Areas at Roche. Also, this opportunity connect me with the patient side, because my focus career usually is from IT side. And this is amazing opportunity to have this holistic view and understand the whole process related with unified patient record. Maybe now, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Rita. And glad to be here. Thanks, Shalini, for the great intro about AIH and the data working group. And so I'm one of the co-chairs. I co-chair the data working group with Shalini. And at Roche, my role is to lead a global medical informatics team. And our goal really is to help Roche scale our ability to work with real world data. And that's everything from bringing data in from the outside world into our studies and other use cases, as well as pushing AI ML based tools into clinical practice. And so really bridging that gap between real world data and all the IT, informatics, and data science teams that we have internally. So back to you, Shalini.
Great, thank you so much. So I think I'll go ahead and speak a little bit now. But first of all, I just wanted to say that this has been a really interesting, great experience. Very grateful to the AAIH and to my dear colleagues for all the work we've done together. In the course of preparing for this webinar, I was asking myself the question of, we have identified certain key questions around what should we consider as the blockers to having a unified patient record. I think we all felt during the preparation that having a unified patient record actually would make a patient's journey that much simpler and easier and less stressful to bear. But was this assertion actually correct? What did a patient think? So I had the really good fortune of being able to speak with two of my very close colleagues and friends who unfortunately also went through very complex patient journeys this year. And when I brought up the subject of a unified patient record to them, both of them were very enthusiastic about sharing their journey anonymously here. So that all of you listening could also understand some of the challenges that they faced. And they were hopeful that by sharing this, they would be able to raise the awareness around what is happening in reality to a patient as they go through what's already a very complex disease journey, as they go through treatment and try to balance the rest of their lives while doing this. What are some of the challenges that they're facing? So the first person that I spoke with, and both of them have had their medical experiences in Switzerland. And I believe that even though one might look at Europe and say, well, it's Europe, it seems that the reality is that there's just so much variation, not only in terms of countries within Europe, but regions within countries, languages within countries, within Switzerland, from one canton, which is a state, to another canton. So this much variation plays a role in these patients' journeys. And I think then it's a good representation of the diversity of experiences that are out there in the world at large. So the first patient talked about how they had brought their medical records from a university hospital system in northwestern Europe, so in the Belgium, Netherlands area, and they had brought this into Switzerland. Now, Those of you who know that region know that there is Dutch, there is Flemish, there is French, in addition to perhaps also some German, depending on which border you live close to in that region. Right, so now imagine that this patient has gone through a very complex journey already, and they are in a position where one of the key medications that they require is an ointment that needs to be custom ground by a pharmacist to a very particular formula that their doctors had devised after a long time of working with them, understanding their condition, and having tested out different treatments. So here's a person who has stabilized on a treatment that needs to be custom made. And they bring all this information as they move for their work into Switzerland. Now, what happens to them in Switzerland? So this person faced, first of all, a language barrier. But before we get to that, we'll get into this specific medication. So this was an ointment, and Switzerland, the pharmacists in Switzerland refused flat out to make it. They basically said, no, we are simply not allowed in this country to make this formulation. Sorry. You can either go to a doctor here and get a prescription for a drug that already exists, or else go back and get it where you've always been getting it. So this is not very helpful. And this patient had to then cross the border, drive to Germany, because they learned that in Germany this was allowed. So then they were able to get it closer to the Swiss border on the German side. And that was just the beginning of their challenges, because now their records were written in one of those languages I mentioned earlier. So now in Switzerland, they moved into a region of the country which borders the German and the French-speaking parts. So first they encountered German, then they encountered French, because they moved within the same canton. So just imagine this situation where if a person has a condition where they need a specially formulated medication, you can understand that it's a very complex condition. They have to now be in a position of translating their medical records, which they had to procure from their original country, bring into Switzerland, take to their doctor, and explain their patient record to their doctor in one of the languages that the Swiss doctors understood. And not only that, but there were some very specific disease terminology that also needed to be translated. And this patient was doing it because they're highly capable. They speak 4 or 5 different European languages. They are a technologist, and they have the ability to be able to play translator and manager of their own patient record. So this person was telling me that truly, if there was such a thing as a unified patient record, their journey would have become so much easier. And what they would like to do is to ensure that people like them who are going from country to country across languages and across regulations even would be supported by the payers as well as by the providers. And if they had the ownership of their own record on a platform, that would make their life a lot easier, that they could point the providers to. So this is the journey that I wanted to share today. And I hope that it sheds a bit of light on the fact that the questions we raised in the formulation of this unified patient record white paper are actually are resonating with patients in the field. And this was also the overall and overwhelming response from the second patient. So I'm going to hand over at this stage back to Kazi.
Thanks, Shalini. And so let's start with let's start with the primary objective of this white paper. And maybe Andy, I'll start with you. What do you think were the primary objectives? Like what got us started for that, and what do you want to accomplish from this?
Yeah, thanks, Kazi. I think one of the big challenges that we have in healthcare, and Shalini alluded to this a little bit, is there's so many different ways to say the same thing, right? And we're all talking about very similar things. And when it comes to something like a patient record or a health record, right? And especially now, there's a lot of discussion around electronic health records. I think there's a lot of variation in how we understand that. And then from there, how we understand all the challenges that lead into it. And so when we talk about a unified patient record, I think there's a lot of different perspectives, some that are regional or geographic, right? So what does that mean in the US, especially given our healthcare system? What might that mean in Europe? But then at the same time, if we look at it from a technical standpoint, there's the kind of the same variation exists of, well, which part of the problem are we really talking about, right? Are we talking about how to store all the data centrally so that we can protect the privacy of our patients? Or are we talking about how we can harmonize that data? And so I think here really it was, how do we lay the foundation and the framework to say, this is what we're discussing, this is how we're laying out the need. And then from there, we have the kind of the underlying foundation on which we can build additional white papers, additional discussions, and other interactions around how we can really start to tackle these core challenges.
Got it. Thank you. Shalini and Rita, do you want to add something?
No, I think Andy captured it great. So nothing from my side. Thank you.
Nothing from my side too. Thank you.
Yeah. So, and I know like Shalini started explaining the challenges, but can you maybe like describe for, us that looking at, because you did this analysis like holistically across like the whole geography across the world, US, Europe, etc. What are those like key challenges, barriers that, prevents us from establishing this unified patient record? Why is it like so hard right now?
Maybe I can start, and my colleagues also can add their ideas on top. But when we started to discuss about the development of this unified patient record, the first barrier that we have identified is the fragmentation of the data. And together with this, we realize the quality of the data, that is really hard to work with the data with a holistic perspective, with a poor data and a fragmented between systems. These are the key challenges that we started to face with. On top of that, as Shalini mentioned in this patient example, we have also the culture problems, the culture issues, language barriers. All those together with this combination is a mix of challenges that we, at the beginning of the articles, we decided to realize and include in the article to start to work with the solutions further, because are really challenges to work and together with them we have technological challenges and application connectivities. All of this helps us to identify how could be the possible solution.
I agree with Rita tremendously here, because in my work, I'm seeing that digitalization, so are the records actually able to be brought together as information and data? Are they ready for that? And then how are they being brought together? This determines if they're ready for further insight and further distribution, sharing, etc. So are they searchable? Are they prepared to be put into a data platform? Can they be accessed? Right? Are the different systems interoperable with each other? So this is a day-to-day problem that I'm seeing, but I also believe this is a policy challenge because in a given system that is running a particular way, one of the ways to force a transformation would be through policy, because this touches upon so many actors. The patient themselves, who does the data belong to? How can the patient suddenly take ownership of their data? Policy change is one way of forcing that to happen. So I think it's a combination.
So maybe like switching to that, and what I'm hearing is that each of the patient's records are locked into like a hospital systems, EMR, EHR systems, right? And in some ways, there is not a whole lot of incentive for the systems to like communicate with each other. So when the patient go from one doctor to another, one hospital to another one, like the records are not transported over. So, Shalini, going back to your point about policy, like how can the government help? Because, is there something, a role that government can play in terms of like, encouraging the system to integrate much more? And also, are there things that the government would do that would actually hamper that progress as well? So, Shalini, can you talk about that?
Yes, I believe that just as some of our colleagues, for example, are looking at a second white paper which goes exactly into this, that how do we make a recommendation to the government? What can they do to support such an effort? And one of the things that they could do is essentially help the formulation of standards around this data. And there certainly are data sharing standards today, but how do we make them prevalent universally? And I think this is where governments can play a role. Can they hinder it? Yes, I believe that unintentionally that also does happen, but perhaps that is happening because of the pace in which technological development for example, sharing data securely is progressing versus the same pace in which the regulatory thought process is progressing. So that's my view on it, but I would really invite Andrew and Rita to add to this.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and especially if we look at it, one thing that I've always thought about a bit is we certainly need technology to bring patient records together. Right? And technology, I think, will always be a core part of the solution, but it's not a technology problem that we're solving, right? It's other challenges, whether it's social, political, and others. And so when we look at the role of government in all of this, I think it kind of becomes a double-edged sword. If you look at some of the work that we're doing in Serbia, for example, and they're trying to build up a national sort of health information exchange electronic health record, they've codified this into law. And what that's done is sort of unlocked the opportunity because every hospital now has to participate. On the flip side, if you define too much in the law and you say you have to use XYZ standards, and let's say the standards move on, right? A year, 2 or 5 from now, we have better standards in place. Do we really want to go back and need to reenact new laws every time? So I think there's a critical balance in there that we need to find as well, such that we can incentivize appropriately through policy, but then as well as not restrict.
Thanks, Andy. Rita, anything that you want to add?
Yes. Maybe some comments on top that I believe that the governments could support this unified patient record, also provide some standardizations that could be common around the global. And one example for to have a starting point is what we have with our bank accounts, for example, that we have 20 digits that is common and globally understandable, and provides first connections to identify a standardization process. This kind of approach and common agreement could be great to the future to from the governments to start this first step. This, I believe, that will be helpful for the patients have their own data and make their decision not only in one country, but globally, and also providing a better integration between different organizations or healthcare systems.
Thank you, Rita.
Thank you.
Yeah, so then we go into the benefits, and I was going through the white paper. It's like I would encourage like all of us to read it. We could actually send the link again in this Zoom. So there are the potential benefits that you mentioned for the unified patient record. So can you elaborate on the advantages of implementing something like this for both the patients but also for the healthcare provider? Like why, what's the benefit for the patient and what would the healthcare providers get out of this? Shalini, maybe start with you. Rita, you want to do it?
Okay. I'm okay for that. Sorry. Well, during the development of the white paper, we explore, of course, the potential benefits of the implementation of this unified patient record and some advantage that we could observe from patient perspective and also the healthcare provider. From the healthcare standpoint, unified patient record streamlines the decision-making process. providing doctors and the healthcare system a holistic view. This not only facilitates the accurate information, but also provide and improve our artificial intelligence usability. On top of that, it's important also to consider that we could have potential reduce the time to the market for the new meds that could bring with this unification. And on top of that, we could have the cost efficiency that brings this healthcare system control. For the patient side, we could have also significant benefits. And of course, the first one is the comprehensive way to understand and access their healthcare data. It's also empower the patients to grant the ownership and control of their own data. And also could eliminate this hassle of managing across numerous access points of information. Saying that, we also consider that there could be a cost reduction in general for the healthcare treatments. And in general, we could say that it's a huge benefit for both sides, patients and healthcare providers.
Thank you, Rita.
Welcome.
Shalini, and do you want to add something to that?
Yes, I think that first of all, I think it's a very comprehensive player by player view that Rita has covered, and it's very true. Naturally, when it comes down to it, the payers, the providers will be looking at what is the case in this for me? How can I actually make this work? Because it has to be sustainable at the end of the day. But I think that for me, the perspective I want to add into this is simply what that second patient told me, that she created her own electronic health record using one of the available platforms, only to find out that the provider is not using it. So nobody is actually benefiting from this tremendous work that she did while she was sick, while she was taking medications that were making her throw up and feel ill. I mean, that's the reality, right? It's a patient is not just a state of a healthy person. It is somebody who is already suffering. And in the middle of that suffering, this person's going online, creating their own record, and nobody's using that record. And I think this is the problem that perhaps it would fix if there was a universal way for this information to come together and for the providers and payers to access it. So to me, it goes back to this person, her story, and how it could be made better if there was such a record.
Thank you, Shalini.
Yeah, and I think one more point there to the question, Kazi, is I think there's sort of two levels to it, right? So we asked, like, what's the incentive or what's the benefit from different perspectives? There's the physician or the nurse or the clinician as an individual, but then there's also the health system or the hospital or the clinic as an organization. And sometimes there's a disconnect there as well. And then I think even to Shalini's example with the second patient there, and why sort of these initiatives for unifying it are so critical is that there's a big trust issue as well in the quality of the data, right? And so depending on how that data was aggregated, how it was pulled together, and if you present it to a physician and they're about to make a critical care decision on it, they're kind of in the back of their mind thinking, can I trust this data, right?
Yes.
And so how do we bring that into the mix as well? And so while there's a lot of focus on privacy and security of the data, I think there needs to equally be focus on trust of the data and how do we ensure that trust and do that at a systemic level.
It's a good point, Andy. So are there like examples of, and we call it shining towers, for example, right? Are there like really examples that, we could really look at and say, yeah, this makes sense and this is the difference it made. And since all of you are in different part of the world, which is amazing to see, maybe Andy, we start with you in the US in particular, like what kind of examples do you see? Or maybe just describe like one or two examples that that are like, success stories for this?
Yeah, I mean, so I just will touch upon there was a question, one of the QAs that was posted too, right? I think there have been a lot of efforts over the years to try to do this. Google, Microsoft, and a few others, and as well as a bunch of startups, myself included, right, trying to go down this path. And I think where we've seen some success is where the patient has sort of taken ownership of that and started an effort in usually a startup, for example, right? Saying, hey, this was a problem that I had with my own disease, and how do I move that forward? And was able to aggregate data about their condition, pull it together, and help inform care decision around that. But I think that success really came because we saw proactive patients, but then we saw willing participants on the healthcare system side. Clinicians who were willing to think outside the box, to push the boundaries, and felt comfortable taking on some of that risk as well. And I think that's kind of the transition period we're in. Obviously, we're seeing a lot more success right now from a standard standpoint, as we see FHIR as an interoperability standard getting incorporated more and more. If we look at what Apple's doing, for example, with HealthKit, they have a big partnership with Epic, and so some of your data is able to be pulled into your device as well there, right? And starting to centralize and aggregate it at that level. And so I think we see pockets of limited success, but not necessarily an end-to-end opportunity yet.
Yeah. I think I'll also, while we're at that, I'll also answer question that Ian put on the chat. How is Roche's experience with Flatiron reflected in unified patient record? I think I would say it's done pretty well, because what Flatiron does, it actually takes the entire patient journey and look at creates this end-to-end journey, starting from diagnosis of the disease to treatment to care and ongoing progression of the disease. And so that data is sitting in different parts of the healthcare ecosystem, and what Flatiron does is like brings it together and like really lays it out in a very easy way that the physician or the research teams can actually leverage this particular information. So the only thing is that Flatiron is in certain geographies and certain hospital systems, so the patients in those are covered, but we need more entities like that can actually bring in this data and unify it together. Rita, do you have also some examples from where you are?
Well, it relate with the integration in Europe. We can see some private healthcare providers starting to unify their patient record and give the access for their own patient, but it's true that is continue be a silo. No, they are continue working for their affiliates only, not integrate with other systems. And in general, it's quite silent, and I only can see an example coming back also from the financial area, where we can also observe some companies that started to offering APIs connections, for example, for different bank account to have one holistic view. This also, again, could be an example to the future. Maybe some providers can jump for and start with this opportunity to connect different providers.
Thanks, Rita.
Thank you.
Colleen, you add something? Okay, we move to the next one. So Andy, you are a master of this, so I'll ask this question to you. So what are some of the technology innovations or standards do you see that are essential, and also that could actually really accelerate this unified patient record?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think one that we're seeing pretty much across the world right now, in the US and Europe, for example, in a lot of the work that my team and I are doing, is FHIR. So that's the Fast Health Interoperability Resources, FHIR, but pronounced FHIR. And if we look at that, for example, and to my earlier point, it sort of sets a foundation that says this is how we need to share patient data, right, and how we can interact with different systems. but then at the same time isn't so overly restricted that what we're requiring essentially is that every single healthcare system on earth align across the board on how to treat patients, how to communicate and share this data. And I think baked within that standard brings in a lot of the learnings that we've had as a field of over the last 10, 20 years or so. And how do we model the data? How do we bring in terminologies and vocabularies to really clearly communicate this, especially as we then need to transcend language barriers? And then we also have other standards like OpenEHR that are focused more on how do we store that data as opposed to how do we transact and send that data around more as a transport standard. Obviously, when we think about data, and anybody here who's in the data science kind of data engineering world a lot knows that the lines get very blurry between these, right? And so what can be used for one use case can be migrated to another. But I think what's really critical for us to remember is that while these standards exist and they're constantly evolving, they need to evolve alongside healthcare, right? And the delivery of medicine and the practice of medicine and the delivery of healthcare. And part of that means that we have to keep up with the changing understanding of biology, physiology, and whatnot. And so that's where we need that flexibility a bit built into the standards as well. And to also keep in mind that these standards are not silver bullets, right? We can't just say like, oh, I support FHIR, therefore everything is done and we don't need to worry about interoperability anymore. It's a tool and we need to make sure that we're using that tool correctly. And how do we really bring that in and make sure that it's aligned for the use cases and that we're able to move these forward?
Thanks, Andy. And I know, Rita, you do this like in your day job as well. So how do you see and what are those technologies
Yes.
that deploy?
It's a very good question, this one. Also, relate with the data domain at Roche that we are continue working, especially in some fundamental baselines. That is the data governance and the data standardization, especially relate with the metadata. Because we first needed to create this common baseline to be able to connect and understand the data that we are assessing, no? And for the other side, we are working more and more with data encryption and with the data anonymization, because we needed to remember that we work with data, personal data, and those kind of data, they have the confidentiality on top and a lot of the compliance. This means we needed to start to work with encryption, anonymization, and it seems easy, but we are starting yet, not all the organizations are ready, and we needed to more and more move those data from one side to another, as you mentioned previously, Kazi, that a part of data sometimes in different countries, and we needed to encrypt those data. Those for me are the fundamental part, and we are working.
Thank you, Kazi. If I may also add here, the Microsoft framework around data sharing is essentially starting off with our approach where we believe that everybody benefits from sharing, opening, and collaborating around data. In order to do this, we have 3 pillars, if you will. Setting the principles for how data collaboration should work. And typically these are how we go from a vision to a framework to a set of tools, then to ensuring that this is integrated into practice. So we have 5 collaboration principles around data. Then we enable this through partnership and exploring projects together. So this is work with leading organizations in the open data movement. It could be with the Open Data Institute. Another example is the GovLab at New York University, and so on. And then we make the data sharing itself easier. So trusted research environments, for example, or a data clean room, for example, everything, the tools, the frameworks, and the templates you need to make the data sharing easier is what we do in that 3rd pillar. So ultimately what Microsoft is trying to do is to close this divide and have a partnership around data that involves partners, that involves an ecosystem that basically makes it possible for different institutions to share their data. So one of the examples I can give you is really from my own work, and this was around ensuring that we had what is called a data clean room approach, so that a hospital could benefit from the insights from patient data without that patient data ever leaving the hospital. So Microsoft came in with the technology, a partner came in with the implementation, and essentially the handover between the hospital and this platform was what we made possible without that data ever physically leaving the hospital's environment. So this is still ongoing. So in a couple of months, hopefully, we will have some results that later on might be shareable. But that's just one example of saying that, okay, we have these patients, we want to examine the disease data, but more than that, what we really want to do is gather the insights from that data. So you will hear about things like differential privacy, Azure confidential computing, Azure open data sets, then the Microsoft Research open data initiatives. But essentially all of this capability falls and it fits within the legal frameworks. And all of this essentially comes together to ensure that we have a set of frameworks, tools, and templates to make data sharing easier. So this is Microsoft's approach to how we share, enable the sharing of data.
Thanks, Shalini. So last question before we end this call, and it's about the healthcare cost and efficiency. So we all know the healthcare cost has been going up across, definitely in the US, but across the world. So what's the impact of this unified patient records on this healthcare cost and efficiency? And I know, Andy, you have done like a lot of research work in this area. Can you also like talk about that?
Yeah, happy to start. Yeah, I think there's a few different levels of where we can see this impact to cost and efficiency. I mean, I think at the most basic level, just from a pure care delivery standpoint, not even getting into this world of AI or ML or anything, is to what Shalini was sharing earlier, and take, imaging for example, right? You get image in one clinic, and maybe you're getting a second opinion or you're going somewhere else and having additional care performed. A lot of the times, they'll just take a second x-ray there. Why? Because it's easier to take that second x-ray than to try to get your record from the other organization and somehow transfer it over. But every time we do that, it's increasing the cost of care for that patient. And so I think from a pure care delivery standpoint, we can already see improved cost and efficiency there. I know within the FHIR community, there's work on the international patient summary, for example. And so this is more Europe focused right now. But the idea is that as an EU citizen, if you're on vacation somewhere else in the EU and you need medical care, can that history follow you, right? And being able to treat you better. So if you can get the treatment you need without waiting a couple weeks or a week to go back home and then having your condition exacerbate or something, I think that's definitely an easy win. But then moving forward, obviously, if we can unify this data and we have a good set of data where patient privacy is protected, I think there's endless opportunity there to then leverage AI and ML approaches where we can then start to do predictive analytics, having more tailored treatment options, right? And sort of algorithmically guided treatment options in a sense, right? And so how do we kind of get the right patient or the right therapy to the right patient at the right time?
Yep. Thanks, Andy. I think there is one question. I think we answered pretty much all the questions on the Q&A panels. We answered the Microsoft Health Well question, the Roche's experience with Flatiron, FHIR, I think, Andy, you answered that. I think there is this one question that came up in the POLAB. Does an organization like WHO, own and drive such an initiative? I think the question is like, because we are dealing with confidential data, who will own and drive an initiative to like bring this patient record together? And maybe also it's a question of like public-private partnership and how does that come into play? Any one of you wanna take a stab at that?
I recall that one of the reviewers of the white paper had put a note in saying that in the US, typically, a lot of the regulations have given the ownership of patient data to the provider. not to the patient, right? So this is typically how the laws have been written in the past. So I think the question really is who should own the data, because a lot of these questions around how we bring the data together, how we protect the data, how we enable sharing, what are the standards we need to put in place. All of this, I think, harks back to who owns the data, because then the implementation will be different. So how can we re-instrument this ownership of data so the patient owns it and they have an easy way of accessing it, and thereby what they do with it is also something that they have agency over. Then I think a lot of the systems that result from that will be different than if the provider owns the data.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Thank you, Shalini. So I think this was the last question. We are coming to an end. So maybe just one line, or it could be even like one word. Sometimes we do it, of your closing thoughts about this topic. And I know, like, you're all like super passionate about this one, and the work will continue on. I know, like Shalini, there will be like more coming in this particular, line of topics. So if you can just talk about that, and then also just like one sentence about this and your thoughts.
The upcoming white paper is actually ambitious. I encourage everyone to keep an eye out for it. I'm also curious to see how it turns out. So some of the lead authors are basically saying we are going to propose a platform and a methodology for actually creating a unified patient record and realizing it. First in the US, I think that's the geography they will cover, and then through the rest of the world. And I'm very curious to see what are they going to propose, yes.
Great. Andy?
Yeah, it's
Closing.
at least in terms of thinking of one word, I don't know if I can do that, but I can think two words and then maybe one sentence. But it's one idea, right? Systems thinking. I think one thing that we really need to bring into this conversation is how do we look at the overall system, right? And not just looking at the technology problem or the regulatory privacy, considerations, but it's how all of these come together and how do we actually solve it and address the problem as a system overall.
Thanks, Andy. Rita?
Yeah, my sentence is patient centricity. I believe that recap everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Thank
actually,
you.
that's true. It's true, and I was gonna say the same. Is like I was reflecting on this paper and also like the discussion we had right now. I feel the unified records is not about technology; it's about people. It's about patients. It's about us, and how do we make
Yes.
the healthcare system safer, more efficient, more connected for everyone involved in this, and how do we help ourselves, help the physicians to help us. So it's kind of a symbiotic system. So we have this opportunity to shape the future of healthcare, where healthcare is seamless, like it's patient-centered. We can see the patient journey. And I really want to thank all of you, our panelists definitely, but also the audience for really being engaged, asking really great questions, and stay connected, stay informed, and let's make a difference in this. Let's make a difference in terms of patients' lives, but also like benefit us in the society. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Kazi. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And just to remind everyone, we have another webinar coming up next week. This is going to be focused on generative AI and the ability to harness it to improve the IND BLA submission process. And we will have someone from the FDA to talk about this, and we're going to have a follow-on panel talking about the different ways we can harness large language models for regulatory submissions and the related risk and challenges associated with it. And just to kind of go off of what Kazi had said, oh, there's my video. What Kazi had mentioned, we really do have an opportunity to be a part of this really exciting time and help build up the industry that we're all in. And if you're interested in joining us, please go to our website, aaih.org, to learn more about how you can join as a member. And I'd like to thank all of our panelists and moderator, and hope to see you all at next week's webinar. We talk about generative AI and the IND process. Thank you all.